Okay, so I'm just having a little go at making you a revision video. We only managed to get up to respiratory system on Friday in revision. You worked really hard. You were very, very impressive, everyone who was there. But I kind of skated over this section quite quickly. So I'm going to have a go at trying to make some videos of the different sections. Hopefully they'll be of some use to you over the weekend. Respiratory then. Um, Key thing to remember about respiratory questions is you have to read them 2, even 3 times before you attempt them. Because if you remember your structure, respiratory questions are nice and straightforward, but you've got to make sure that you've read it really clearly because there are so many variations to a respiratory question. You know, you just look at gaseous exchange in itself. It can be internal, external, rest, exercise, oxygen, CO2, both gases. So you've just got to make sure you're super clear on what it wants before you start, and then write in the sideline, in the margin, sorry, just your key structure. So is it high, low, to, from? Is it mechanics question? Is it muscles, movement, TCV, whatever that is? And then you should absolutely fly through these questions. Okay, so there's lots of key terms to know for respiratory. If you can just have out with you now your glossary, possibly your A3 sheets that I worked through with you, and a copy of these slides if you were in the tutorial on Friday, or you collected them from me before you went, or if you were in another exam. Okay, so vital capacity, you should be saying in here, it is it's the maximum amount of air that can be forcibly exhaled after maximum inspiration. Tidal volume, volume of air that can be inspired or expired per breath. Breathing rate, number of breaths per minute, okay, as well. Don't forget any values for these. And you've got your equation there, so you've got V equals TV times F. Pop it in the triangle that you've been looking at so that you know your equations. Gaseous exchange, the exchange of gases. We know that we could be asked about internal gaseous exchange or external gaseous exchange. That can be quite tricky. I always remember internal is further in, so internal gaseous exchange is between the muscles and the capillaries. It's further in, where external gaseous exchange is going to be at the alveoli. Again, gaseous exchange, it'll ask you about a particular gas. Never mention the other one. So if it asks about oxygen, never mention CO2. If it asks about CO2, never mention oxygen. If it just asks generally about gaseous exchange, I would deal with one gas and then the other one with some nice clear subheadings for the examiners. The RCC is your respiratory control centre. It's located in the medulla oblongata and it's going to control breathing. It has both your inspiratory and your expiratory centre, which are along the bottom there for you. Inspiratory centre is obviously responsible for inspiration, the recruitment of 2 nerves. You've got your phrenic nerve and the intercostal nerves, which I'll have a look at in a bit more detail when we get to control. Expiratory centre, we know, is passive at rest. Nothing happens to cause us to breathe out at rest. Just what was happening to cause us to breathe in stops. It's passive. And obviously we know it works during exercise to cause a forced expiration. Bore shift. Bore shift is to do with increasing dissociation of oxygen from hemoglobin during exercise. And you would expect to see the curve shift to the right. Association is oxygen combining with hemoglobin. Dissociation is just to do with something separating in kind of chemistry terms. So it would be to do with hemoglobin letting go or releasing its oxygen. And then diffusion, we've done that a million times. Diffusion is the movement of gases from an area of high pressure to an area of low pressure down a diffusion gradient. Key thing to remember with diffusion, during exercise we make steeper diffusion gradients because we want faster rates of diffusion. Okay? So put them all in your glossary. Feel free to just pause this video whenever you want, so that you can obviously go through it at your own pace. Your next section is values. Now we know that 5% of the marks in the exam will be for qualitative data. So you've got to know your values. We should expect to see values, graphs, questions, equations throughout the exam. So give you a little chance to pause me now. Try and write down your values. Try and say them on your phone and record yourself. When you're happy that you've done it, unpause me and then we'll have a little look at the data together. Most important thing with values is, as well, do not forget your units of measurement, sorry. No units, no marks. Okay? So we've got breathing rate, breaths per minute, tidal volume, millilitres, and minute ventilation, litres per minute, or use of millilitres per minute, as long as you're obviously making the suitable conversions there. Okay, so just pop me on pause, have a little go at that, please. Okay, so we're back now. We're going to have a little look at the values. So you can see there 12 litres, 12 breaths per minute, between 12 and 15 in an untrained athlete, 11 to 12 in a trained athlete. Key things that I think to remember is that a trained athlete has greater strength of inspiratory and expiratory muscles. Okay, so you know they've experienced hypertrophy. When we looked at the heart, we said trained athlete would experience cardiac hypertrophy. They have a bigger heart, so they can generate bigger stroke volumes. It's the same thing here with the respiratory system. They'll have increased strength of respiratory muscles, and therefore, if you look over here to our tidal volume during maximal exercise, they can generate greater tidal volume values there. And ultimately, what we can then see is that a trained athlete during a maximal exercise is bringing in more oxygen every minute, has a greater minute ventilation. So we need to know the impact of that. Greater oxygen intake then is going to mean obviously greater O2 supply to the muscles. We know therefore that we could respire aerobically for longer. If we're respiring aerobically for longer, we are going to be creating more energy using the aerobic system. We're going to be delaying the anaerobic threshold, delaying obla. So we're not going to fatigue as early. It's going to improve the quality of performance, and then you could provide a nice sporting example. So for example, a midfielder in football could perform for longer without tiring. It would raise the quality therefore of his performance. Okay, so just check over them values. It's okay to not know something now. It's Saturday, the exam is Monday, so anything you don't know, have your spec with you, highlight it on your spec, or have a little notes page next to yourself now and note down, gosh, couldn't remember breathing race for a trained athlete during maximal, whatever it is, and then obviously you know where to focus your revision tomorrow, because we want to start obviously cutting down now and getting just to the revisions, obviously just about finding the things we don't know so that we can then fix them, so don't worry about that. Okay, alright, we might see a graph that looks a little bit like this. So VE response to exercise. You can see here the different obviously lines indicated the different intensity of exercise. You'll obviously notice again that that looks very similar to a graph you've seen before, and it is heart rate response to exercise. So if you've remembered that, this is exactly the same, but we're just going to make slight changes in our description to reference the respiratory system. So to start off with, number one, what have we got? We've got an anticipatory rise, again due to the release of adrenaline, but instead of saying stimulates the SA node to increase its firing rate, we're just going to say it stimulates the RCC. Okay. When exercise begins, VE increases, obviously to supply the increased demand for oxygen. If the intensity of exercise is moderate, light, submaximal, anything like that, we're then obviously going to expect to see a plateau. And then during heavy intensity exercise, we'll see a continued increase towards maximal values. And then after exercise, then we have obviously still got two stages of recovery, rapid decrease and then a slower decrease. Okay, have a little read of that, make sure you're happy with it. Okay, there's a little sentence I didn't say for you there. Rapid rise in VE due to the stimulation of the RCC, causing an increased frequency and tidal volume. But I think we should be pretty happy with that. As long as you can just remember to make them references to the respiratory centre, you were all very good at interpreting that graph for the heart. Okay, so there's your graphs and your data. Okay, your next bit then, mechanics of breathing. This is super easy if you can remember your structure. So in the sideline, I would write down straight away muscles, movements, TCV, PP, air. So inspiration we know is active. If it's active, it requires energy, therefore it must be requiring a contraction. And we know we make reference to two particular muscles. We talk about, it's all come up there for you, talk about the external intercostals and the diaphragm. So during inspiration, both the external intercostals and the diaphragm contract. The external intercostals cause the ribs to move up and out and the diaphragm to flatten. This therefore increases the space inside the thoracic cavity. Remember, the bigger the space, the lower the pressure. Think possession game in football, if I make the area bigger, you're under less pressure, right? You've got more space. So the partial pressure decreases. We have to say below atmospheric air pressure. If it's not below atmospheric air pressure, there is no inspiration taking place. So please don't forget that sentence for yourself. Air therefore moves down a diffusion gradient from an area of high pressure to low pressure. That's often on the mark scheme. Always throw in your definition of diffusion. So air ultimately comes in. And as I mentioned to you before, expiration is passive. So nothing happens to cause you to expire. Just what was happening to cause you to inspire stops. Okay? So the external intercostals relax, bringing the ribs in and down. The diaphragm relaxes, lifts up, becomes dome-shaped. Therefore, the space inside the thoracic cavity has decreased. Therefore, the lung air pressure increases. It goes above atmospheric air pressure and air therefore moves out. Okay? Now, it could ask us, inspiration at rest, inspiration during exercise. It could ask us expiration at rest, expiration during exercise. So the 4 possible questions for us there. Inspiration then, my table here says rest. Please ignore that. It should say exercise. The ones I printed for you say exercise. So if we look then at inspiration during exercise, the external intercostals and the diaphragm still contract, but now they contract with more force. And there's also the recruitment of additional inspiratory muscles. So you can use the sternocleidoid and mastoid if you can spell it. I'm not confident I can, so I always go for the pectoralis minor. That causes the ribs to move up and out more than at rest. That's your key sentence during exercise for mechanics. The diaphragm flattens more than at rest, okay, with more force than at rest. If you don't say more than at rest with more force than at rest, the examiner will just too vague you for exercise because you're not being specific enough. This increases the thoracic cavity volume more than at rest. Therefore, this decreases the pressure, the lung air pressure, more than at rest. Okay, this creates then a steeper diffusion gradient. Remember, I talked about if I push you down a hill with a relatively small gradient or a much steeper gradient, you travel much quicker the steeper it is, and therefore we get more air in. Now that links to tidal volume. Inspiration alters tidal volume. Okay, so therefore more air in during inspiration during exercise means a greater tidal volume, which we obviously seen in the values before. For expiration, expiration is no longer passive, so it says passive here. Expiration now becomes active. However, the external intercostals and the diaphragm, they still relax, okay? Because what we'll see later on when we look at control, the external intercostals and the diaphragm are stimulated by the phrenic and intercostal nerves, and they are in the inspiratory centre, so they're still going to relax. However, the expiratory centre now recruits additional expiratory muscles and they contract. So you could get the internal intercostal, you could use the internal intercostal, you could use the rectus abdominis, and they are now contracting. That brings the ribs in and down and pushes the diaphragm up more than at rest, or with more force than at rest. This creates a smaller thoracic cavity volume, so it decreases more than at rest. Therefore, the lung air pressure, if you think about possession game in football, if you're in a 10 by 10 yard kind of zone, you're playing 2v2, and then I decrease that to a 6 by 6 yard area. I mean, it's very, very small, let's face it, I don't think it would fit in, so that wasn't a great example. But obviously, therefore, the smaller space, the more pressure you're under. So the pressure increases more than at rest, and is obviously, we still got to keep that sentence, more above atmospheric air pressure than at rest. Therefore, the diffusion gradient becomes steeper and we get more air out. Now, that is called a forced expiration. So forced expiration increases the rate of inspiration. So if it takes us less time to breathe out, we get to breathing in sooner. Okay, so inspiration will increase tidal volume during exercise. Expiration during exercise increases frequency or rate of breathing. Okay, right, take a few minutes to have a little look over that, say it back to yourself, make sure you're happy with it, and then obviously just progress with me to the next slide when you're ready. Okay, so control. Whilst we're here, because I haven't made a vascular or cardiovascular book video yet, because obviously we got through that, anyone who arrived on Friday, I'll take us all the way through control. But I'll start with the RCC because that's the section we're in at the moment. Okay, so we know we have a number of different types of control. We have hormonal control, which is to do with the release of adrenaline. Intrinsic control, which is to do with venous return or temperature. Please remember, intrinsic control, we don't use it with the RCC, we only use it in the CCC. We're talking about control of the heart. But venous return, one of them controls venous return, and one of them controls stroke volume, and one of them controls heart rate. All the other types of control, I would mention both heart rate and stroke volume together. Okay, so intrinsic control, an increase in venous return, we know increases stroke volume, Starling's law, and obviously a decrease in venous return decreases stroke volume, where an increase in temperature is going to increase heart rate, a decrease in temperature, decrease in heart rate. And then we've obviously got neural control. Now, remember, don't be confused with the neural control question if it's, 4 marks, 5 marks. If you talk loads and loads and loads and loads about the receptors and what they detect and why, that's fantastic, but you're not going to ever get all the marks for just doing receptors. So as soon as you see neural control, think receptors, but keep that nice and brief, unless it's in a big question. Okay, so unless this is tied into into your 20 marker. All right. So neural control, we think receptors, we think chemoreceptors. So during exercise, we know they detect an increase in the partial pressure of CO2. Why? Well, it's a waste product of aerobic respiration, and there's obviously increased aerobic respiration during exercise. A decrease in pH due to an increase in lactic acid. A decrease in the partial pressure of O2, because we know it's being used for aerobic respiration. An increase in motor activity is detected by the proprioceptors and the baroreceptors. Now, with baroreceptors, if the question is about respiratory system, I would say detects an increase in the stretch, in the lung stretch, or the stretch inside the lungs. But if it's to do with the CCC or the VCC, I would tend to say they detect an increase in an increase in blood pressure, or obviously if it's recovery, a decrease. Be dead careful with control, because they've only ever previously asked about during exercise, but on your spec it does say rest or exercise. So, if it says rest, obviously be careful to reverse everything. So a decrease in temperature, a decrease in venous return, a decrease in CO2, an increase in O2, what I mean. Please do not, and I say this every single time we've gone through this, do not say changes. It's really vague. Okay. So we've got our different types of control there. Now we're going to move on to the RCC. So the receptors receive the information. They send it to the RCC, which interprets it. The RCC then has two centres, your inspiratory centre and your expiratory centre. The inspiratory centre will, at rest, stimulate the phrenic and the intercostal nerves. The phrenic nerve will cause the diaphragm to contract and flatten. The intercostal nerve will cause the external intercostal muscles to contract, and obviously that causes the ribs to move up and out. So we're now just going into your mechanics, all right? As we know, the diaphragm flattens and the ribs move up and out, the thoracic cavity volume increases. So the lung air pressure, the partial pressure inside the lungs decreases, it goes below atmospheric air pressure and air comes in. If the question is specifically about exercise, I would say the phrenic nerve and intercostal nerves increase the stimulation to the external intercostals and the diaphragm, causing them to contract. And then our key sentence, more than at rest. It also, remember, recruits additional inspiratory muscles such as the sternocleids and masseter, or the pectoralis minor, which is the one I go for when I'm writing it. Although beware, there was a question, I think it was on the SAMs or one of the practice papers, that asked the role of the sternocleids and masseter. So you still do need to know that that's linked to inspiration during exercise. We know that causes the ribs to move up and out more than at rest. The diaphragm to flatten more than at rest. Let me see where my mouse is. Diaphragm to flatten more than at rest. That causes an increase in the size of the thoracic cavity. So the thoracic cavity volume increases more than at rest. Therefore, the partial pressure inside the lungs decreases more than at rest, creating a steeper diffusion gradient, causing more air to come in, and we know that means increased depth of breathing or tidal volume. And you know your tidal volume units, values. Okay, during rest, the expiratory centre is not active, right? Because remember, nothing happens to cause us to expire at rest. However, during exercise, the expiratory centre recruits additional expiratory muscles, such as the rectus abdominis, the internal intercostals, and they contract. That causes the ribs to move in and down with more force, the diaphragm to lift up with more force, decreasing the thoracic cavity volume more than at rest, increasing the partial pressure more than at rest and further above atmospheric air pressure. That therefore creates a steeper diffusion gradient, and we are ultimately therefore getting an increased rate of breathing or frequency of breathing as a result of the forced expiration. So imagine, I always think of it like a balloon. If I was to untie a balloon and just let it deflate, okay, it's going to deflate nice and slowly. However, if I was to make it active, which I do during exercise, and I was to squeeze that balloon, if I squeeze that balloon, I'm going to get the air out quicker. Sooner the air goes out, the partial pressure inside the lungs therefore drops. It goes below atmospheric air pressure, therefore drawing air back in. So I get to inspire sooner. Okay, that was quite a lot. Again, feel free to pause me, look over that, try and draw it out on a piece of paper for yourself, walk yourself through it on the A3 sheets, whatever you prefer, write down anything you'd like to revisit, play it back, whatever you choose here. But I'll have a little look then at the CCC. So the CCC receives information from the receptors again. That therefore interprets that information to decide whether we're resting or exercising. So again, if it's during exercise, we know our chemoreceptors are detecting our increased ppm of CO2, our increased motor activity, our decrease in partial pressure of oxygen, etc. And it therefore responds by stimulating the sympathetic nervous system. This sends its information via the accelerator nerve. That's nice and easy for us. The scientists made it nice and obvious for us. Accelerator is going to obviously speed up heart rate. That is going to therefore increase the firing rate of the SA node, which is our runner number 1 in the conduction system. Therefore, the impulse is going to race around the walls of the atria, causing atrial systole, and it is ultimately going to lead to an increase in heart rate, which is obviously the response we want during exercise. We increase heart rate, we increase cardiac output, therefore we're increasing oxygenated blood, impact of a performer, able to use the aerobic system to generate its oxygen. It will delay fatigue, it'll improve quality of performance, delay the anaerobic threshold, we know all that. However, if the CCC receives information that indicates that CO2 levels are now on the rise, motor activity is decreasing because the game is finished, we're now walking off to the changing rooms, it's going to detect a decrease in blood pressure, it's going to detect an increase in oxygen levels, it's going to go, oh, okay, we must be recovering, right? So we can now start to lower heart rate, and we've seen that. I think back to our graph, as soon as exercise decreases, we have our 2 stages of recovery, our rapid decrease and then our slower decrease. And we know it doesn't drop straight away because we have to repay the oxygen debt. So the CCC then would respond by stimulating the parasympathetic nervous system. Remember, I told you I think about it as parachutes going down, so heart rate decreasing. So the parasympathetic nervous system sends its information by the vagus or vagus nerve. That then decreases the firing rate of the SA node and ultimately decreases heart rate, right, allowing the body to return to its pre-exercise state. VCC, now the one area students tend to kind of forget with the VCC is it only uses one nervous system, so it only uses the sympathetic nervous system, and it either increases or decreases sympathetic stimulation, okay? Now you just imagine your blood vessels, if I was to electrocute them, if I was to electrocute your muscles now, what do? They contract, okay? If they contract, they vasoconstrict. So therefore, if I decrease sympathetic stimulation, stop electrocuting you, your muscles are then able to relax, so the blood vessels can relax or vasodilate. All right. So the VCC receives the information from the receptors. During exercise, it would respond by increasing sympathetic stimulation of the arteries, arterioles, and precapillary sphincters. I would say all of them if you can, because quite often on mark schemes you'll see it'll give one mark for saying there's increased sympathetic stimulation of the precapillary sphincters, and then there'll be another mark for saying of the arteries and arterioles. So it's just an easy way to grab an extra mark in the same sentence. So it would increase sympathetic stimulation of the arteries and arterioles and precapillary sphincters going to the organs, right, non-vital organs, during exercise, causing them to vasoconstrict and therefore decreasing blood flow. Always say the impact on blood flow. If you really want to show off, you can use your percentages. You can say it can decrease them from 80 to 20% approximately. And then obviously there's decreased sympathetic stimulation, again, of the arteries, arterioles, and precapillary sphincters going to the working muscles, causing them to vasodilate, increasing blood flow, and we know that can go from anywhere from 20% to around 80%. And we had a look at that in the vascular system the other day in revision, and we said, remember, at rest, cardiac output can be about 5 litres per minute. You're only sending 20% of that to the muscles, so we're talking there a litre per minute. During exercise, if it's maximal exercise for a trained athlete, you can generate cardiac output values of up to 40 litres per minute. So you now can be sending, Mo Farah can be receiving 80% of 40 litres per minute, 36 litres per minute of blood now in the muscles, so 36 times as much blood. Okay, obviously that's fantastic, because that's going to mean increased oxygen availability to the muscles, aerobic respiration, and all the same speech we've been saying over and over again. So that's your control. Be super careful to get the right type of control to start with. If you do get neural control, don't talk too long about the receptors and think that you'll pick up all the marks. You won't, because that's actually not saying how that control mechanism is then altering either blood flow, respiratory system, or the cardiovascular system. Okay, so always just think, I'd be thinking in my head, submax 2, at best half the marks for talking about the receptors. It's lovely to be able to write that if you've got a big question, but we want to be concise in the exam, so we spend our time wisely. Okay, again, if you're in the tutorial the other day, I gave you the sheet. If you remember, we did this in a practical in lessons when we went into the sports hall and we took all our values. Have a little look over control. It's a nice big section. We have actually answered a control question on VCC and CCC. It was the first 10 mark you did, so that'll be in your file. I think I gave you a model answer as well. And then a bit later in the year, we answered RCC and CCC. So like I said, just have a little look over that. It's quite a big section, control. And just be careful not to fall into the kind of common errors that students often do, getting increased and decreased sympathetic stimulation linked to vascular vasodilation and vasoconstriction the wrong way around. Increase in stimulation, vasoconstriction. Decrease in stimulation, vasodilation. Students tend to be really good at the CCC, and they tend to forget about the phrenic intercostal nerves, so students tend to forget about the RCC, so just give that a little bit of attention today and tomorrow if you've got time and you feel the need to. Again, feel free to pause me now, look back at your spec, highlight anything in green you're happy with, write down any notes for things that you'd like to revisit. If you do come across anything in any of these videos that you think, oh, I really desperately need some help with this case, please just send me an email, tweet me, send me a little Instagram video. And obviously revision starts at 7 on the day of the exam, so I can happily look over it with you then. Okay, so your next section, gaseous exchange. Gaseous exchange then has loads and loads of variations in the question, like I said to you before. So we firstly run through if you see a gaseous exchange question, a series of questions for yourself. Is it internal or external? It's your first question. Internal, it's further in. Okay. Once you've established that, is it asking you about which gas? Oxygen, CO2. If it doesn't mention a gas, we're going to address both, but separately. Okay. Once I've established that, then my final step is to say, is it rest or exercise? Run yourself through them 3 questions. Make sure you're super clear on what it's asking before we begin. Remember, I say to you all the time, don't start any answers unless you're clear on what your answer is going to look like. Because yes, there's that initial bit of time you've got to give there before starting to write things down, but the exam is not a race. You'd be much better composing yourself, establishing what it's asking you, establishing exactly where you're going with this, and then writing super concisely. Okay? And keep your eye on your timer all the time. Alright? Mark a minute. We should go a little bit faster through movement analysis and data questions, and we add that then at the end, the extended question. We're not letting that be consumed by the small 4 or 5 markers throughout the paper. We don't have time for that. The essays where this exam will be won and lost. It's a big 20-mark essay, remember, for physiology. Okay, so gaseous exchange. It's external. So I am dealing with the exchange of gases between the alveoli and the capillaries. And I've got that key structure for myself that I'm literally going to write in the margin, and each one of them is going to get its own paragraph. By paragraph, you know, I mean 2 lines. I'm going to tick them off as I go through so I know I've missed nothing. So I'm going to start by saying, where is the gas high? Where is the gas low? What is diffusion and the diffusion gradient? Where does the gas move from and to? And I'm going to finish with a show-off sentence if I can. By show-off sentence, I kind of mean what's next, what's the next stage. Alright, so to start with then, if I start over here with CO2, I'm not going to click because I think it all comes up at once. It does. Okay, right, so I'm going to start with CO2. At rest, the partial pressure of CO2 is high where? Okay, well you should know therefore that that's in the capillaries. If I really want to show off, I might say why. Well, it's a waste product of aerobic respiration. Where is the CO2 low? Well, it is low inside the alveoli. In fact, just pause, mate, and have a go at answering this yourself. Both rest and exercise for external. And then press play on me again and listen to me go through it and just check your understanding. Remember, revision is always about testing yourself, not just rereading and rewriting again and again and again. Test yourself. Do I know it? Yes. Move on. Okay. So I'll go back for that. So CO2 is high in the capillaries because it's waste product of aerobic respiration. It is low inside the alveoli. Diffusion is the movement of gases from an area of high pressure to an area of low pressure. So the CO2 will move down the diffusion gradient from the capillaries into the alveoli. Show off sentence, I would just say where it expired. Okay. Remember, CO2 isn't really harmful in the muscles. It can decrease pH, but it's not considered to be a harmful byproduct. But we don't want to accumulate. We do want to get rid of it, and more importantly, we want to reoxygenate the blood. Okay. O2 then, at rest. O2 is high in the alveoli. We've inspired it. It is low inside the capillaries. But why? Well, the red blood cells, remember, have unloaded that inside the muscles for respiration. Diffusion, keep repeating the same sentence. Diffusion, the movement of particles from an area of high pressure to low pressure. There's almost always a mark for a diffusion definition in a gaseous exchange question. So it moves down the diffusion gradient from the alveoli into the capillaries. Show off sentence where we could start talking about here. It dissolves in plasma. It combines with hemoglobin to produce oxyhemoglobin, and then is transported to the muscles or the respiring cells, whatever you want. Okay. Exercise then. Key thing to remember: exercise. We said it before. We have to make steeper diffusion gradients. Okay. Again, if you haven't already, have a little go now at doing it for exercise, and then press play on me again when you're ready to have a little listen through. Okay, so exercise and CO2. CO2 then is high in the capillaries, and I would say it's higher than rest because there's been increased aerobic respiration, so increased production of CO2. It is low in the alveoli. There is a steeper diffusion gradient created, and therefore the CO2 moves from the capillaries into the alveoli at a faster rate when it's expired. The O2 then, the O2 is higher in the alveoli than at rest, because if you think about it, there's been an increase in VE, increased tidal volume and increased frequency, so therefore we're going to be getting more oxygen in. It is lower inside the capillaries. Well, why? You know, it's been used for aerobic respiration and energy production. The diffusion gradient, therefore, is steeper, and that means faster rate of diffusion. So the oxygen moves from the alveoli into the capillaries at a much faster rate. If you really want to show off here, you could talk about increased saturation, therefore, of hemoglobin, and increased transport of oxygen, increased availability of oxygen to the muscles, and therefore increased aerobic respiration and energy production. Okay, so have a little look over there. Check it. Are you happy with it? If you are, move on. You know, I think these are all fantastic at this area anyway. It's just checking, run through them 3 questions for yourself. Is it internal, external? What gas is it? Is it rest or exercise? Plan in the margin. Okay. All right then, we will, there's our during exercise. Okay, so I did change the title on the graph, so we're okay here. So I've put a few little bits of explanations in there, just increased breathing rate and depth. I think I said all them to you anyway. Have a look over that, pause it. Are you happy with it? If you are, let's move on together then. Okay, so internal gaseous exchange, the exchange of gases between the blood and capillaries and the muscle tissues with cells. Now again, we've got CO2 and O2. I'm going to establish what gas it's asking about, and I'm going to establish whether to rest or exercise. We're going to start with CO2 at rest. Okay, again, pause me now. Have a little go at answering this. Record yourself on your phone. You haven't got time to keep writing things again and again and again and again and again. So nice and quick. Check over it. Record yourself. Listen back once we've gone through the answers. Anything you didn't get right, stick it down in your notes. Okay, so CO2 at rest. The partial pressure of CO2 is high in the muscles, okay, because we know it's a waste particle of aerobic respiration. It's low, therefore, in the capillaries and the blood. Diffusion, movement of particles from an area of high pressure to an area of low pressure. So the CO2 moves down diffusion gradient from the muscles into the blood capillaries, where it is then returned to the heart. If you really want to show off, you can say via the vena cava, returned to the heart, then taken back to the lungs by the pulmonary artery where it's expired. You could also talk about how CO2 is transported in the blood. We looked at this in the vascular system. Remember that oxygen is transported 2 ways. Hemoglobin as oxyhemoglobin and dissolves in plasma. CO2 is 3 ways. The first 2 are the same, combines with hemoglobin, but as carbaminohemoglobin. Remember, mino means 1. It dissolves in plasma as well, but it also dissolves in water to produce carbonic acid. So you could get a question on the transport of CO2 or O2 around the body. And then if we do O2 at rest then, well, we know O2 is high in the capillaries because we know it's combined with hemoglobin. It's been transported around the body to the respiring cells. It's low in the muscles and the cells because it's being used for aerobic respiration and energy production. Diffusion is the movement of particles from an area of high pressure to an area of low pressure. Therefore, oxygen moves down a diffusion gradient from the capillaries into the muscles, and then shell sentence where it can be used for aerobic respiration and energy production. During exercise then, we know we're going for steeper diffusion gradients. We know there's increased aerobic respiration. So the partial pressure of CO2 is higher in the muscles because there's increased aerobic respiration taking place. It's low in the capillaries. We've got a steeper diffusion gradient, therefore faster rate of diffusion from the muscles into the capillaries, where it then returns to the lungs and expired. O2 is higher in the blood. There's increased VE, remember. There's increased saturation of hemoglobin with oxygen. There's increased cardiac output during exercise. There's the vascular shunt mechanism kicking in, so the transport of oxygen now to the muscles is much higher. It is lower inside the muscles because it's being used for aerobic respiration, any oxygen that is available. Diffusion gradient therefore is steeper. It's therefore faster rate of diffusion from the blood cells, the capillaries, and into the muscles. And show of sentence, therefore it's more readily available for energy production. And again, all the same things we've said before. That means increased aerobic respiration and energy production, delay the anaerobic thresholds, improve quality of performance. So there you go, there's rest. Have a little look at that, screenshot it if you want to. So, or pause me if you want to write it out anywhere for yourself. And then during exercise. Okay. Okay, so the last little bit then we're going to start to have a look at is dissociation, association and the ball shift. This could be a question on the exam. I mean, anything could be a question on the exam, but it's quite a tricky one. So if you pay attention to this, we'll make sure if it comes up that we're perfectly happy with it. Okay, you could get a graph and be asked to answer that question. What is the saturation of hemoglobin when the partial pressure of oxygen is? It can give you just about anything. Remember, if you get a question like this, go along this bottom axis here till it gets the partial pressure that it's asking for. Draw a line up to meet the curve. Draw a line across to the axis over here. Notice I didn't know why an x-axis there, because I haven't done GCSE maths for about 14 years. Don't tell anyone that. And then I can work out the saturation. So I can see here at 40 mmHg of oxygen, there is roughly there, we've got 75% saturation of hemoglobin with oxygen. Okay, so I could get a graph to try and interpret there. I could also get this graph in relation to the Bohr shift. Now remember, Bohr shift is to do with the fact that hemoglobin dissociates, well, oxygen dissociates from hemoglobin more readily during exercise, because we want the hemoglobin to let go of the oxygen more easily, because there's obviously a greater demand for that oxygen inside the muscles. Okay, so what you'll see with the Bohr shift is this curve shifts to the right. So you'll see the curve looks a bit like this. Right. I should have had a graph on there for you, but you do have them in your notes. You do have them on the A3 sheets I passed across to you as well. So the higher the partial pressure of oxygen, the higher the percentage saturation or association to hemoglobin. So we can see here when there's 100 mmHg partial pressure of oxygen inside the lungs, we can see we get 98% saturation with hemoglobin. I'm sorry, let me just go back. So therefore, what we're basically saying there is 98% of the hemoglobin is fully loaded with oxygen. That's obviously going to be great for oxygen transportation. Okay, and we know there's greater partial pressure of oxygen during exercise due to the increase in VE and tidal volume and frequency of breathing. Okay, as the partial pressure of O2 decreases, the hemoglobin more readily dissociates with oxygen. So that's a key kind of term for you to remember. And the Bohr shift. Okay, so there are 4 factors that affect the Bohr shift and cause the dissociation curve to shift to the right. Now I gave you a mnemonic for this, if you remember rightly, it was COAT. So just think back to yourself now really quickly, pause me. What does COAT stand for? Okay, well, COAT stands for, remember, CO2, oxygen, acidity, temperature. If you struggled with that, have a little go now. Now that I've given you what the COAT stands for, see if you can identify what happens to each of them things during exercise. Again, just pause me, try and answer it, then listen back, see whether you smashed it. Okay, right, well, your COAT there, it stands for CO2, which increases during exercise, O2 levels, which decrease, acidity levels, which rise, and temperature levels, temperature which also increases. When each of them 4 factors occurs, the dissociation curve shifts to the right, and the oxygen dissociates from the hemoglobin easier, right, or more readily dissociates. And that means that therefore the hemoglobin lets go of the oxygen much easier. Okay. If you remember from fibre types as well, we talked about something called myoglobin, and I said myoglobin's like your oxygen bus. Things to know about myoglobin is myoglobin has a much higher affinity for oxygen than hemoglobin does. So it holds on to oxygen much more tightly. But it also, myoglobin, key thing to maybe write down, I don't think I had this on your A3 sheets, myoglobin dissociates from oxygen, or oxygen dissociates from myoglobin at lower partial pressures of oxygen. So that's quite good, because when we're exercising, we know the partial pressure of oxygen in the muscles drops. It's being used. So when the partial pressure of oxygen is low, the myoglobin can still give up its oxygen. which we obviously know is important, because that oxygen is taken to the mitochondria for the aerobic respiration system then to take place. All right. Okay. So that impact. Then I was going to say, what's the impact of this on a sports performer? Well, that increased association means the oxygen more readily associated, so there's more available, and go through the same routine we've gone through. So there's more oxygen available for aerobic respiration. Therefore, more energy can be produced using this system. Therefore, we can delay the anaerobic threshold, we can delay fatigue, and then keep saying what it actually does to performance. Well, it improves quality of performance. Well, why? Well, because an athlete can work for longer, or they can recover more quickly. I'd be quite impressed if I seen a student do that as an examiner. All right then. And you could obviously ask about recovery. So the dissociation curve during recovery will shift back to the left, because obviously all of them factors that shifted to the right coat start to be reversed. So CO2 levels will decrease, O2 levels will increase. You get the gist. All right. Okay, now I had a Kahoot if we were going to do in class, but don't worry about that. We're going to start to have a little go at some questions now. So if you think you're not ready for that, pause me, look back over the areas you've noted down as being a challenge for you at the moment, and then come back and press play again when you think I'm ready to have a go now and see where I'm up to. Please don't shy away from questions. That's really what I want you doing now over the next couple of days. Look at a question, answer it. Anything you didn't know, note down, then revise that so we're in reverse. Don't just keep reading and reading and reading and writing. Gosh, you haven't got time. Okay, so I've got 18 marks worth of respiratory questions, or 15 minutes because I was also being a bit stingy. Okay, so first question. So figure 1 shows the relationship between the partial pressure of oxygen and the percentage oxygen saturation of hemoglobin at rest, hemoglobin during exercise, myoglobin. This was a question from 2017 AS paper from one of the exam boards. So have a little go at that. So it says complete table 1 to identify curves A, B and C shown in figure 1. Write either A, B or C in the box next to the relationship that it matches. Use each letter only once. Okay, so you have to identify whether A, B or C is indicating saturation of oxygen with either hemoglobin at rest, hemoglobin during exercise or myoglobin. Pop me on pause, pop your timer on for 3 minutes, have a little go, press play again when you're ready to move on. Okay, next question. We got 15 marks worth of questions here. Have a little read of them. Please remember your technique when answering questions. That will really be, honestly, it'll make a great difference on Monday, at least. So remember to pick out the command word. What's the command word? Does it describe, explain, identify, analyse? That indicates to us the level of detail needed. Okay. Identify what's the topic. What is it asking me about? Is this gaseous exchange? Tidal volume? Control? What type of control? Have a look then for your other instruction. For physiology, it's often rest or exercise. Remember I said to you socio, it's often a time period, 20th century, pre-industrial, post-industrial. For socio, it's almost, for AMS and psychology, it's almost always sport and example. So have a look. Command word, topic, other instruction. Are you clear on what it's asking? Write a quick plan in the margin, anything 4 marks, 5 marks or more, and then begin your answer. So have a little read through these for me. Pop me on pause, pop your timer on for 15 minutes. Have a little go at this. Okay, right, we're ready to start trying to answer some of these questions then. So first things first, we had the graph to try and interpret. So if you have a little look at your graph, hemoglobin at rest is curve B, hemoglobin during exercise is curve C. We should have been able to identify the difference between hemoglobin at rest and exercise because we obviously know during exercise the ball shift is kicked off, so the curve is shift to the right. Myoglobin is curve A. Way in which we should have known this, if I just flick back to the curve to have a look at it for you, is at lower partial pressures the myoglobin has a much higher affinity for oxygen. Affinity is like attraction. So just imagine the oxygen is far more attracted to myoglobin than it is to hemoglobin. So even if there's only a couple of oxygen knocking around, myoglobin is going to be really quite saturated. Okay. That was a bit tough. That was a tricky question. But obviously now if it comes up again, we would be absolutely fine with that, hopefully. Alright, next one. So using figure 1, explain the role of hemoglobin and myoglobin during exercise. That's a 4-mark question. The command word is the same to explain, but it clearly splits into 2, so I would be thinking there that's a 2 and a 2. Can I write subheadings? Actively encouraged. Alright, so I know it's 2 and 2, so I'm going to try and say 2, possibly 3 points if I can about each of them. So explain the role of hemoglobin during exercise. Well, I would be saying hemoglobin combines with oxygen. And because it says during exercise, which was the other instruction there, I would be saying during exercise the hemoglobin dissociates from the oxygen more readily, or the Bohr shift occurs. Myoglobin, well, what's the role of myoglobin? Well, myoglobin, I'd be starting by saying it's located in the muscles. It combines with oxygen. And I would be saying at lower partial pressures it dissociates from the oxygen easier, or it has a higher affinity for for oxygen. I'd probably get marks for any of them. So let's have a little look. Check your structure out. You know, when you're reading now, don't just scan and go, yeah, I got that, yeah, I got that. Actually look at your answer and go, right, was I waffling? Cross out anything you think was irrelevant. Were you nice and concise? Did you have your subheadings? Did you have short, sharp sentences? So we can see there we would have got one, a mark for hemoglobin saying transports oxygen. We would have got one for saying less saturation during exercise. I didn't say that. But I did say about the dissociation curve. So I'd got 2 there. And it says submax 2, so my interpretation of the question was right. And then myoglobin, stores or transports in the muscle cell, so I've got that one. Myoglobin has a higher affinity for oxygen, nice, I'd have said that. And oxygen dissociates from myoglobin at low partial pressures. I think I said that. So I'd have got 3, so there's a tick twice there, and my last one would have written max. But I had that backup one in case anything went wrong, so that's perfect. An athlete has a tidal volume of 0.5 litres and a breathing frequency of 12 breaths per minute. Calculate the athlete's minute ventilation used in values. Show your working. So instead of show your working, definitely write down your equation. So I know I've got to work out what it asks me to do. Calculate VE. So I know VE equals TV times F. So my tidal volume is 0.5. Pay attention to the unit measurements, which is litres. So I've got 0.5 times 12, and my units are litres per minute. So I'd have got 6 litres per minute if I'd have calculated that. Okay, right. Hopefully that was nice and easy for you. Next one. During a 5,000 metre race, the athlete's tidal volume increases. Explain how neural control causes this to happen. During a 5,000 metre race, the athlete's tidal volume increases. Explain how neural control of breathing causes this to happen. Okay, so right, what is the question asking me? It's asking me to explain neural control, so that's what I'm talking about. And its other instruction there, it is during a 5,000 metre race, so it's during exercise. So I'm going to have a little go at answering that question then. So I would obviously be saying here, the other thing to pay attention to is tidal volume, so it must be making reference to inspiration. So I'm saying here, receptors send information to the RCC. It increases stimulation of the phrenic and intercostal nerves, causing an increased depth of breathing. It's going to be talking about the change to the mechanics there, isn't it? So the ribs going up and out more than at rest. I might also say it causes the recruitment of additional inspiratory muscles, such as the pectoralis minor. That's the one I go for. So let's have a look at that. So the RCC is stimulated, by the receptors. Do not spend time talking about the receptors there, in my opinion. It's going to give you a mark for naming any, but I'd have got them for just saying the receptors stimulate, send information to the RCC. I wouldn't have got any additional for naming the receptors. It then causes an increased depth of breathing, well, we said that. Increased stimulation of the phrenic and the intercostal nerves, causing the diaphragm and the ribs to contract with more force. They'd have been great, but it's only a 2-mark question. You know, if it's 4 marks, I'd have talked about that. And the recruitment of an additional expiratory muscle. Okay, so we've got that. The next one, for a performer at rest, describe how carbon dioxide diffusion at the alveoli. So, what's it asking me about? Well, it's diffusion at the alveoli, so it's external gaseous exchange. It mentions carbon dioxide, so I'm never going to talk about another gas, and its other instruction is rest. Okay, so I'm going to write in the side here, high, low, diffusion gradient from and to. So, CO2 then is high in the capillaries, it is low in the alveoli. Diffusion is the movement of particles from an area of high pressure to an area of low pressure. So CO2 moves from the capillaries into the alveoli where it's expired. So how did you get on with that? So movement, so here, gases move from high pressure to low pressure, so I've got a mark for my diffusion definition. CO2 diffuses through the alveoli, got a mark for that. It's high in the blood of the capillaries, got a mark for that. It's low in the alveoli. They're the submax there because it's in the same box, but it was only a 3-mark question, and a bigger question I'd probably got marks for both of them statements. There is a diffusion or concentration gradient. Okay, hopefully that was nice and easy for you. And then your final question here is explain the role of the sternocleidomastoid muscle in respiration during exercise. So it's told me it's during exercise. Now, I would need to know that the sternocleidomastoid is involved in inspiration in order to get these marks. So, I would be saying here the sternocleidomastoid is recruited, it contracts, it brings the ribs in and down with more force, it therefore decreases the thoracic cavity volume more than at rest. Got to remember that key statement. So the partial pressure is lower than at rest. There is a diffusion gradient which is steeper, and it is further below atmospheric air pressure. So air now is going to come in, and there'll be an increased depth of breathing or tidal volume. If it was a bigger question, I could even show off by adding some values in there, if you're very, very impressive if you're an A-star student. Okay. So contraction, sternocleidomastoid. Maximum of 2 marks to be awarded for AO1 and 2 marks for AO2 here. So contraction, AO1, AO2 is your explanation. So what's the impact of that contraction? Well, of course, the ribs move up and out more. Increased thoracic cavity, decrease in pressure. Oh, here you go. We could have also said relaxation. During expiration, it allows the rib cage to move in and down. I don't think I'd have thought of that. And that therefore would have submaxed me at 3 of the 4. Okay, so we need to obviously pay attention to that. What does it do during relaxation? That's tricky. I think I'd have lost a mark there. Okay, well, hopefully that was of some use to you. I will stop the video now, so you can stop me now, and I will see if I can upload this to YouTube, and if I can, then I'll try and make an energy for exercise and a heat and altitude one for you later today. Alright, bye bye.